Listen. I am Mama Otomba, and I have lived long enough to know that every city carries a ghost inside its throat. That is what I told the young policeman the night he came to my apartment above Lenox Avenue, with rain dripping from the brim of his gray hat and fear trembling inside his eyes like a nervous trumpet player before midnight. Harlem in those years was never truly asleep. Even after the war had passed and the boys came home carrying invisible wounds behind their smiles, the streets still breathed music. Smoke floated from basement jazz clubs. Women in velvet dresses walked beneath broken neon lights. Men played dice in alleyways where steam rose from the grates like spirits escaping the earth. And somewhere between the smell of whiskey and roasted peanuts, and old brick wet from rain, the dead walked close beside the living. I knew this because the dead often visited me. They always had. My grandmother carried the old spirits from the Ivory Coast in the bones of her hands, and when she crossed the ocean in chains, the spirits crossed with her. Some nights I still heard her singing in the language of dust and salt and moonfire, while I burned herbs near my window facing 125th Street. People came to me for many things in those days. Lost husbands, sick children, curses placed by jealous lovers, musicians with shaking hands who feared they had offended the spirits of rhythm. But the matter of the singer began with empty chairs. Every Thursday night, around midnight, a young trumpet player named Ezekiel came to my apartment carrying terror beneath his skin. He was a handsome boy with dark skin, smooth as polished mahogany, and eyes too old for his age. He played at a club called the Blue Opal down on West 131st, a smoky underground place where white downtown millionaires came searching for forbidden music and black sorrow wrapped inside brass melodies. Ezekiel stood in my doorway sweating though the October air was cold. He said, "Mama Otomba, I think death been singing at the club." I remember the wind outside suddenly stopping when he spoke those words. Even the curtains froze. I told him to sit. I poured him tea steeped with bitter cola and mint leaves while my black cat, Wilson, watched from the windowsill with eyes glowing green like swamp fire. Ezekiel explained that 3 weeks earlier a new singer had appeared at the Blue Opal. Nobody knew where she came from. She arrived after midnight dressed in silver silk with a veil covering half her face. The owner hired her after hearing only one song. Said her voice made the bottles shake, Ezekiel whispered. Said grown men cried. I asked her name. Ezekiel swallowed hard before answering. Miss Sabine. The moment he spoke it, Osun hissed. That troubled me. Animals know things people do not. Ezekiel continued. Every Thursday Miss Sabine performed only after the club emptied. The owner would lock the doors. No customers allowed. Only the band remained. But the strange thing was this. Before she sang, the waiters arranged 30 empty chairs in perfect rows facing the stage. No people sat in them. Only emptiness. Yet, during her performance, Ezekiel swore he heard breathing coming from those chairs. Sometimes soft laughter. Sometimes weeping. And she sings to them like they alive, he said. Like she can see folks sitting there. I asked why he had waited 3 weeks to come see me. He looked down at his trembling hands. Because trumpet player before me disappeared. The room became colder then. I lit another candle beside the altar near my wall, where photographs of my ancestors rested beside cowrie shells and carved wooden spirits from Dahomey. Ezekiel told me the previous musician vanished after one of Miss Sabine's performances. No police report. No investigation. Just gone. The owner told everyone he left town. But Ezekiel did not believe it. "'Cause I hear things after she sing," he whispered. "I hear somebody crying under the stage." Outside, a siren wailed somewhere downtown. Harlem breathed its endless midnight breath. I asked Ezekiel if he had ever seen Miss Sabine clearly. He shook his head slowly, veil always covering her face. "But I seen her eyes once." He paused, then crossed himself. "Ain't no living woman got eyes like that." I should have sent him away. At my age I already carried too many ghosts. But something deep inside my bones stirred awake when he spoke. Old spirits whisper to women like me. They pull at the edge of your soul until you listen. So the following Thursday I dressed in white linen and wrapped blue beads around my wrist for protection. Beneath my coat I carried a small leather pouch filled with graveyard dirt, red palm oil, and powdered ebony root. The streets of Harlem glistened wet beneath moonlight as I walked toward the Blue Opal. Jazz drifted from cellar doors. Lovers argued beneath flickering lamps. Somewhere a drunk preacher shouted about Judgment Day, while a saxophone answered him from the darkness. When I arrived outside the club, I immediately felt wrongness in the air. Not evil exactly. Older than evil. Ancient. Like the feeling of standing beside a grave forgotten by history. The Blue Opal sat beneath a pawnshop hidden behind a narrow staircase descending into red darkness. The music upstairs sounded lively enough, but underneath it I heard another rhythm. Slow. Hollow. Like ceremonial drums played far away in a desert at night. The owner, Mr. Bellamy, met me at the entrance. Fat man. Gold rings on every finger. Smile too quick to be honest. When he saw me, his face lost color. Club's private tonight, Mama, he muttered. I looked into his eyes and saw exhaustion there. Fear too. Deep fear. The dead don't care about private invitations, I told him. He tried to laugh, but the sound cracked halfway out his throat. Inside, cigarette smoke floated thick enough to choke angels. The regular crowd drank and danced while the band played hot jazz beneath dim amber lights. But all around the edges of the room I sensed shadows standing still. Watching. Waiting. Ezekiel played trumpet without joy, his eyes constantly drifting toward the backstage curtains. Around midnight, the customers suddenly began leaving all at once. Not slowly. Not naturally. As though some silent signal had been given. Within 10 minutes, the club emptied completely. Mr. Bellamy locked the front door himself. Then the waiters began arranging the chairs. 30 of them. Perfect rows facing the stage. Empty seats waiting beneath low golden light. My skin crawled. One waiter refused to look directly at the chairs while setting them down. Another quietly prayed under his breath. The band members sat stiff and pale. Nobody spoke above a whisper. Then the lights dimmed further. The drummer tapped his sticks 3 times. And Miss Sabine walked onto the stage. Even now I still remember how silence followed her. Not ordinary silence. Heavy silence. Spiritual silence. The kind that falls before funerals and storms and executions. She wore silver again, shimmering like moonlight reflected on river water, and her veil hid most of her face except for her lips painted dark red like fresh blood. But it was her presence that chilled the room. She did not walk like human beings walk. She glided. Slow and smooth as smoke, drifting over graves. Then she turned toward the empty chairs and bowed her head gently as though greeting honored guests. And one by one the empty chairs began to creak beneath invisible weight. The sound of those chairs bending beneath unseen bodies spread through the club like dry bones cracking in a furnace, and every soul in that room heard it because I watched grown men lower their eyes in terror, while sweat rolled down their necks despite the cold. I remained still near the back wall beneath a weak amber lamp, clutching the leather pouch hidden inside my coat while Miss Sabine lifted one elegant hand toward the band without ever turning to face them. The drummer began first, tapping softly like a heartbeat beneath dirt. Then the piano joined with slow, sorrowful notes that drifted through the smoke like funeral prayers whispered in church basements after midnight. Ezekiel raised his trumpet with trembling hands. I saw him glance once toward the empty chairs, and in that brief moment his face lost all color because he saw what I saw. Shapes. Faint shapes sitting there. Not fully formed. Not alive, yet not entirely dead. Shadows wearing the memory of human bodies. One chair held the outline of a woman with feathers in her hat. Another carried the shape of a broad-shouldered man smoking a phantom cigar whose smoke curled upward before vanishing. They flickered in and out like old film burned by fire. Then Miss Sabine began to sing. Lord have mercy, even now I feel her voice crawling inside my bones when I think of it. She sang low at first, barely above a whisper, but every note carried impossible weight. It did not sound like any language born from ordinary mouths. There were English words hidden inside it, yes, but beneath them lived older sounds. Ancient sounds. Sounds from before ships crossed oceans. Sounds from desert fires and blood ceremonies and moonlit sacrifices beneath carved stone gods. Her voice wrapped around the room like invisible silk. The glasses behind the bar trembled softly. The lights flickered. and the spirits sitting in those chairs leaned forward together. I knew then this was no nightclub performance. This was feeding. I closed my eyes briefly and listened deeper with the ears my grandmother taught me to use long ago. Spirits always hunger for something. Some hunger for memory, some for grief, some for vengeance. But these things sitting in the chairs hungered for sound itself, for music born from suffering. Harlem had plenty of that to offer. Miss Sabine sang about trains carrying coffins south through burning cotton fields. She sang about mothers burying sons whose names newspapers never printed. She sang about chains beneath Atlantic waves where forgotten skeletons still reached upward through black water. And every note fed the room. The shadows became darker, clearer. I could almost see their faces now. Some wore old Harlem fashions from the 20s. Others looked far older than America itself. One spirit near the front row wore tribal markings burned into his cheeks. Another appeared wrapped in military uniform stained black across the chest. They sat perfectly still listening to her song with unbearable hunger in their hollow eyes. Then I smelled blood. Fresh blood. Sharp beneath the smoke and whiskey. My gaze shifted toward the stage floor where dark liquid slowly seeped between the wooden boards near Miss Sabine's feet. Nobody else seemed to notice. The band kept playing like men trapped inside a dream they could not wake from. Miss Sabine's voice rose higher, deeper, richer with impossible sorrow until suddenly the trumpet stopped. Ezekiel lowered his instrument and stared toward the far left corner of the empty chairs. Tears streamed down his face. I followed his gaze and saw a new shape sitting there. A young man holding a trumpet in his lap. His throat was slit open from ear to ear. "Lord Jesus," Ezekiel whispered. The figure slowly turned toward him. I knew immediately this was the missing musician. Dead. But not resting. The ghost smiled with bloody teeth while Miss Sabine continued singing without interruption. Then all the spirits turned their heads toward Ezekiel at the exact same moment. Every chair creaked together. That was when the candles near the bar suddenly extinguished themselves. Darkness swallowed half the club. A woman screamed somewhere near the kitchen. And I felt the old spirits around me awaken. I reached inside my coat and crushed ebony powder into my palm before whispering the protection prayer my grandmother taught beneath Louisiana swamps many years ago. The air changed instantly. Miss Sabine stopped singing mid-note. Silence crashed over the room. Slowly, she turned her veiled face toward me for the first time. Though I could not fully see her eyes, I felt them pressing into my soul like cold knives. The spirits in the chairs began murmuring softly, dozens of overlapping whispers speaking languages older than Harlem itself. Mr. Bellamy stumbled backward near the bar muttering prayers while sweat soaked through his collar. Miss Sabine descended from the stage with impossible smoothness. Not walking. Floating almost. The room temperature dropped so sharply I saw frost gathering near the windows. She stopped only a few feet from me. Up close her perfume smelled strange. Not floral. Not sweet. It smelled like dry earth after graves are opened. "You carry old gods with you," she whispered. Her voice without singing sounded even worse somehow. Too hollow. Like sound echoing inside an empty tomb. I answered carefully. "And you carry the restless dead." She tilted her head slowly. Beneath the veil, I glimpsed skin far too pale beneath the dim lights. "The dead deserve music too," she said. Behind her, the shadow figures shifted in their chairs with growing agitation. Some twitched unnaturally. Others leaned sideways as though trying to hear us better. I realized then that Miss Sabine was not controlling them. She was serving them. Feeding them songs to keep something far worse satisfied. "What are you?" I asked softly. For a long moment she did not answer. Then she lifted one hand toward her veil. "Mr. Dim." Bellamy immediately shouted from across the room. "No." Terror cracked his voice wide open. Too late. Miss Sabine pulled the veil aside. "I have seen corpses rise from river mud. I have watched possessed men bite through their own tongues during ceremonies beneath eclipsed moons. But nothing prepared me for the face beneath that veil. One side appeared beautiful beyond reason. Smooth, dark skin. Full lips. Golden eye glowing softly like candlelight. But the other side looked ancient and dead. Flesh dried tight against bone. eye socket hollow and black as burnt wood. Thin cracks spread across her skin, like old pottery buried beneath sand for centuries. She smiled sadly at my horror. Long ago they buried singers alive beneath desert temples, she whispered. Their voices became bridges for wandering souls. The shadows behind her stirred violently now. The dead trumpet player stood slowly from his chair. Others followed. One by one they rose in silence. The club filled with the sound of creaking wood and soft ghostly breathing. You should not have come here, Mama Otomba, Miss Sabine said gently. They know your name now. Then every spirit in the room began humming together. Low. Deep. A terrible humming that vibrated through the walls and floorboards. And inside my chest, bottles exploded behind the bar. The lights overhead burst one after another until only the stage lamp remained glowing weak and yellow through the darkness. The dead musicians stepped forward from the rows of chairs. More figures emerged behind them now, crawling upward through the floor itself like shadows leaking from hell. Men in old suits. Women wearing funeral veils. African faces painted with sacred ash. Slave chains dragging across invisible dirt. Their eyes all empty. Their mouths all moving silently beneath the humming. Ezekiel fell to his knees, clutching his ears. Blood trickled from his nose. Mr. Tathian. Bellamy tried unlocking the front door, but his hands shook too violently to fit the key. I knew then the truth of the place. The Blue Opal had not become haunted by accident. This land carried older wounds beneath it. Before Harlem clubs and neon lights, before the apartments and storefront churches, there had once been burial grounds there. Forgotten graves of black souls erased by the city and built over with concrete and jazz and liquor. But forgotten does not mean gone. Miss Sabine had awakened them through music. Fed them grief until they grew hungry enough to rise. The humming deepened. One spirit approached Ezekiel slowly, the slit-throat trumpet player reaching bloody hands toward him. Another spirit began climbing onto the stage backwards like a spider wearing human skin. Mr. Bellamy collapsed, crying near the entrance. And still Miss Sabine stood before me with sadness burning inside her living eye. I did not mean to wake them all, she whispered. Only the lonely ones at first. Then the dead reached the bandstand together, and the piano began playing by itself. The piano keys moved without human hands touching them, each note striking sharp and hollow through the darkness, while the dead gathered closer around the stage in slow, trembling circles. And I understood then that the club no longer belonged to the living. Harlem itself seemed far away. No taxi horns. No laughter from the avenue. No midnight lovers arguing beneath neon lights. Only the humming of restless spirits and the terrible music pouring from that piano like water flowing backward into a grave. Ezekiel lay curled on the floor, clutching his trumpet against his chest, while the slit-throat ghost bent over him, whispering things no living ears were meant to hear. Blood dripped steadily from the young man's nose onto the cracked wooden boards. Mr. Bellamy sobbed openly near the locked entrance, too broken by fear even to pray any more. But Miss Sabine stood motionless before me, with tears sliding silently down the living side of her face. The dead side remained stiff and ancient as dried parchment. You opened the gate, I told her quietly. Her golden eye closed slowly. No, she whispered. The gate was already open. Harlem opened it years ago. The spirits surrounding us hissed softly at those words, their shapes flickering between human and shadow. I listened carefully then, not with my ears but with the deeper sense carried through bloodlines, older than slavery and older than America itself. Beneath the humming and the piano music and the rattling windows, I heard grief. Endless grief. This place had become swollen with it over generations. Black men beaten in alleys by policemen who never faced judgment. Women dying alone in cold apartments after singing their hearts empty for rich white crowds downtown. Jazz musicians poisoned by liquor and loneliness and heroin, while the city applauded their suffering as entertainment. All that pain remained trapped beneath Harlem's streets like buried fire. Miss Sabine had simply given it a voice. The spirits moved closer now. One faceless woman drifted past me, carrying a dead infant wrapped in stained cloth. A blind old man with burned hands stood beside the bar, humming along with the piano. I saw African warriors wearing iron collars beside boys in zoot suits, stained with blood from race riots. Generations of forgotten dead gathering shoulder to shoulder inside that underground club. Then the piano abruptly stopped. Silence crashed down again. Every spirit turned toward Miss Sabine at once. And for the first time, fear entered her eyes. "They hungry," she whispered. The slit-throat ghost seized Ezekiel by the ankle and began dragging him slowly toward the stage. The boy screamed then, finally breaking free from his terror long enough to fight. I rushed forward immediately, throwing red palm oil across the floorboards while shouting the old protection words passed down through the women of my family. The oil ignited blue. Flames burst upward in a circle between Ezekiel and the dead. The spirits recoiled with shrieks that sounded like rusted metal scraping stone. The entire club shook violently. Dust rained from the ceiling. Miss Sabine staggered backward, clutching her chest as though invisible hooks had pierced her ribs. "You cannot keep feeding them," I shouted at her over the chaos. "They will never stop." Her expression twisted with agony. "They were forgotten," she cried. "I gave them songs because nobody else remembered them." The dead began screaming now. Not angry screams. Mourning screams. The sound swallowed the room whole until I thought my skull might split open. The ghostly crowd surged against the blue fire surrounding us, dozens of pale hands reaching through the flames toward Ezekiel. The slit-throat musician stared directly at me, then opened his mouth impossibly wide. Black sand poured out instead of blood. Desert sand. Ancient sand. Suddenly I understood where Miss Sabine truly came from. Not merely Africa. Something older. Some wandering spirit born from forgotten burial rituals beneath Saharan kingdoms long erased by time. A soul condemned to sing for the dead forever. She had crossed oceans hiding inside music itself until Harlem called to her with all its sorrow. And now the city's dead would not release her. The stage lights exploded overhead. Darkness swallowed everything, except the burning blue circle around me and Ezekiel. Through the shadows I saw the dead beginning to change shape. Their faces stretched unnaturally. Their limbs lengthened like smoke twisting upward from fire. If they fully crossed over, Harlem would drown beneath them. Every nightclub, every church, every apartment building filled with restless souls hungry to be remembered. I reached into my leather pouch one final time and removed the cowrie shell necklace my grandmother gave me before she died. I had sworn never to use it except when the veil between worlds tore completely open. The shells felt warm in my palm, almost alive. Miss Sabine saw them and immediately fell to her knees. "No," she whispered weakly. "If you close the gate, they take me too." Around us the spirits shrieked louder, pressing against the blue flames. Ezekiel sobbed beside me, barely conscious now. My heart ached for Miss Sabine then. For all her horror, she had only wanted the forgotten dead to be heard one last time. Harlem used black music like candles, burning souls bright before throwing them away into darkness. Perhaps the spirits deserved mourning. Perhaps they deserved remembrance. But not this. Never this. I began chanting softly in the old language my grandmother carried across the sea. The shells vibrated violently in my hand. One by one the spirits froze where they stood. The screaming stopped instantly. The dead turned toward me together with expressions suddenly calm and unbearably sad. Even the slit-throat musician released Ezekiel's ankle. Miss Sabine trembled as tears poured down her face. Then the walls of the Blue Opal began breathing inward like lungs collapsing. The floor cracked open beneath the rows of empty chairs. Wind roared upward from below, carrying the smell of old graves and desert storms. One by one the spirits began falling backward into the darkness beneath the floorboards. Not struggling, not screaming now, only watching silently as they disappeared. Some looked relieved. Others looked lonely beyond words. The woman carrying the infant kissed its forehead before both vanished beneath the earth. The blind man removed his hat politely toward me before fading into shadow. Finally, only Miss Sabine remained standing on the stage beneath the dying yellow light. Her body flickered between beauty and decay. Her golden eye met mine. "Will they remember us now?" she asked softly. I could not answer. Harlem remembers music better than people. That has always been its tragedy. The floor beneath her split open slowly. Sand poured upward around her feet like black water. She closed her eyes. and then she began singing one final time. No instruments accompanied her. No spirits hummed beside her. Only that lonely voice rising through the darkness with enough sorrow to wound heaven itself. She sang about ships crossing black oceans, about girls stolen from villages beneath burning suns, about jazz musicians dying nameless in cold apartments while applause still echoed in their dreams. And as she sang, her body slowly crumbled into drifting ash and sand, until nothing remained except the voice itself lingering in the air a few moments longer before fading forever. Then silence came. True silence. The blue flames vanished. The club lights flickered weakly back to life. The chairs stood empty once more. Mr. Bellamy stared around the room like a man waking from madness. Ezekiel wept quietly against the stage holding his trumpet, and beneath the floorboards of the Blue Opal, the dead finally slept. The club burned down 3 weeks later. Electrical fire, newspapers claimed. Nobody died. By spring they built a grocery store over the ruins. But sometimes late at night, when rain falls heavy over Harlem, and the city smells of whiskey and old smoke, I still hear her voice drifting through Lenox Avenue beneath the distant sound of jazz trumpets. And every Thursday after midnight, 30 empty chairs appear in my dreams, waiting patiently for a singer made of sorrow and sand.